like we have tried in our heritage in India and Pakistan. For example, language is very much part of one's identity. When partition took place, we had a language which the Angrez called Hindustani, which was a mixture of Hindi and Urdu, whereas Urdu itself was already a mixture of lots of Hindi words, but it was the kind of street language that Urdu was originally supposed to be before it became a formal structured language. When we got here, there was a concerted effort made by the Pakistan government to undo the Hindi words and become more and more Persianized and Arabicized, just as there was on the Indian side to become Sanskritized rather than Hindi and Farsi. And for years, we'd hear this from our Hindu friends across the border. They would listen to Radio Pakistan news because it was still understandable, and we'd listen to Delhi because it was getting out of hand here. They were using bigger and bigger words.
Yes.
Our identity was not Arab, not until we went to Dubai. So, you know, and for commercial reasons, our identity started changing. We went from Khuda Hafiz to Allah Hafiz. We went all the way. And the Indians did the same. And we came up with words which were ridiculous from both sides. I mean, they produced Hindi words like Bhag Bhag Adda for railway station. So, you know, I mean, it got out of hand.
I can't understand them half the time.
And after a while, I mean, look at their films. One of the most amazing industries is obviously Bollywood.
Bollywood, yeah.
And it was primarily Hindustani, not Hindi. All the actors and actresses spoke better Urdu than most of us do in our homes, regardless of where we come from. Story writers were Indian, but the poets were invariably Muslim Urdu-speaking poets. For a long time dominated the scene, which is why even to this day their songs are still more Urdu than Sanskrit.
Absolutely.
But another reverse has taken place with this desire to look at Bollywood, an identity that we don't want to identify with and yet crave somehow, is when my daughter was at grammar school. In the Urdu period, the teacher asked what was the Urdu word for family. And 2 kids shot up their hands and said parivar. So much for identity.
Star plus, my God.
I mean, you know, that's the kind of silly thing that happens. Because you don't force these things. These become part of your culture. Your identity, if there is a national identity, grows by accepting that there is unity in diversity. In America, the Italians have a very strong Italian identity. The Germans have their identity. They hold their festivals. The Jews and the Muslims and the Christians have religiously different identities. They hold their festivals, but together they're very, very American. Here we have a forced identity. This is what it means to be Pakistanis at the expense of giving up everything else. And we can't seem to get together.
You know, it's interesting that you use America as an example. I find that in India as well.
It is. It's strong.
Indians are very, I mean, we're Indian and then we're whatever.
When it comes to Indianism, as being Indian, they will present themselves as Indian throughout. They will feel Indian. My own relatives who are in India will tell you that the Muslims have a very bad time here. They don't have opportunities, increasingly getting more difficult. I understand all that. But yet, it doesn't mean that they want to be Pakistani. They want India to be put right. It's India before. The Kashmiris recently, when they came, that guy who came, the author who was appearing, he said the same thing. That, you know, when I arrived in Lahore, I saw Nawaz Sharif supporting Kashmir by saying Kashmir hamara hai. But I don't want to be Pakistani. I am Kashmiri. So Kashmir to hamara hai. Okay. So identities are the ones that other people decide for you. Khud to, it's too complex. I mean, I couldn't live with just one identity. What would I do with all my other ones? As it is, I'm sort of schizophrenic anyway.
But that's a very interesting thing to end on as well, that, I mean, you know, why limit yourself to one identity? How can you?
How can you?
And I think you need to broaden your horizons and stop thinking the typical, like I was saying earlier, that, you know, it's like you said, it's what the Americans choose to think of you.
Because it's easy to then exclude you. That's the way it is. I mean, you know, if you identified horses differently, you can be cruel to them. If you thought they were fellow living creatures, let's not hurt them. It's very tricky. You know, shall we not eat other living creatures? Become vegetarians and say, oh my God, even flowers have souls possibly. So what do we do? I mean, keep going. So it's because you choose a point and a demarcation line of your convenience that suits you and stay there.
Absolutely. And I think the point is just what I'm taking away from this is, you know, to stay curious, to keep learning.
There is one thing, Sonia, if you understand, there is that a lot of this movement. I mean, I think, I don't know whether Sharmeen's own feelings come from there or not, but a new quest for identity has come very strongly from many of our younger generation who've gone to America and come back educated from there, because there's all this talk of identity and they've been marginalized there. And while the Indians and everyone else suddenly chooses to fall back on what they've conceived as a very solid identity, we seem to have a very loose idea of identity. And therefore, these kids are looking for something to call their own or belong to. And it's their search. I don't know whether you saw Peter Sellers' film The Party years ago.
Birdie Num Num.
Yeah. And in that film, which is now by all standards politically incorrect, but there was a scene, obviously the guy who was being typified was an Indian guy, but from their point of view it was generic. It could be Pakistani, it could be Indian. The name was Harundi V. Bakhshi, and therefore it could be any kind. But in that there was a scene which, although the word Indian is used, but I think it could apply equally well between the East and West. This is a very Western search also, the search for identity. It's not so much an Eastern search. And that is why I think our Westernized students get into this. Because there was a scene in which Peter Sellers walks in something and unannounced where he shouldn't be. And this guy gets very upset and he said, "Who the hell do you think you are?" And he turns around and says, "Sir, in India we don't think who we are, we know who we are." So that to me spells identity for the East. We know who we are. I think this is a very Western idea of we don't know who we are, because most of them are migrants from all sorts of places and have got into it. Today they have found an identity. They know who they are. They know they are Americans. But India has always known that it's India, and we hope that we will always know what we are. We may have had political differences and moved away. You can't take away poetry and culture. I mean, why have we got Rumi, Hafiz, etc. in our identity? This is not even Indian. This is Persian. So I'm not a Persian.
I agree.
But it's you can't take Rumi away from me or Hafiz away from me. It's my culture. It's part of my identity.
It is.
What has that got to do with Pakistan or even India?
Such a good point. Such a good point to finish on. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And hope to have you again on the show.
Thank you.
Soon.
Okay.
With that.